Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain. I want to welcome you to this webinar presentation on 5 emerging trends to consider for your supply chain, your supply network optimization initiative presented by Verison. One quick note, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button, that icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, modern supply chain challenges require modern supply chain solutions. As supply chains evolve into supply networks, legacy processes and platforms become less and less effective. Today, we're going to explore how proper investment into modern materials intelligence methods can amplify your efforts and build what we call material truth, the trust that you'll have what you need, when you need, and where you need it. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. Paul Noble is founder and CEO of Verison, an innovator in supply chain data, inventory, and procurement technology. He oversees the company's vision and strategic direction. He has extensive experience in the industrial supply chain and distribution space and was recognized as a supply chain pro to know by Supply and Demand Chain Executive in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Josh Ferguson is Senior Manager of Product and Content Marketing at Verison. Josh is focused on creating thought leadership assets to help global organizations streamline their materials management strategy. So let me kick this off with a question for Paul. Paul, when you started the business, did you foresee such massive supply chain chaos so soon? It seems like Verison was founded just before everything hit the fan.
Sure. And good to see you again, Bob. Thanks for everyone that took the time to come out today. We hoped, right now, we saw some of the challenges, right? There were a lot of things, this consistent balance of risk and capital, and which one did you choose? It was either or for a long period of time, having been in supply chain and worked across users and suppliers and suppliers, and seeing the complexity and seeing how these organizations were limited in the way they could collaborate with one another, and how the underlying foundation of data was more or less broken and inhibiting and handcuffing what the opportunity is that we're starting to realize now, and we're kind of thwarted into that based on market challenges and the things that we went through over the last couple of years. It was great that we had already been in motion, seeing this, developing technologies that could overcome and solve for a lot of those foundational issues across systems, across processes, and across people. And because that's really what we solve for. And we're able to go to market and test that thesis and that technology in a pretty crazy environment, and build off of that with some really great customers and partners.
Well, thanks for that. But Josh, let me ask you, as a supply chain expert who's been with Verison working in product marketing for about a year, what drew you to the business?
Well, yeah, so I've been in this space for a little while now, starting on the consulting side before moving into tech. And, traditionally I've been working with, traditional systems like a WMS, ERP vendors, or, a TMS vendor or supply chain planning vendor. But then, I got a chance to meet Paul, and he was, explaining to me how they were, approaching a very, very complex challenge in a way that no one else had really done it before. How they were, as he mentioned, being able to connect these systems without reliance on traditional data cleanses or having to bring in third-party consulting firms. And, even though that is needed from time to time, depending on the initiative, but as Paul was, mentioned, what he saw in the past was, this was, whether it was M&A or whether it was just scaling too fast or competing initiatives, the risk versus capital, that no one could seem to figure it out. And so Paul came along and, introduced and saw a real opportunity to do something different in the space. And so that's what really drew me in.
Certainly, there had been plenty of automation up to this point, but it sounds like this is a good opportunity for you to look at the true next generation of automation as opposed to some of the legacy solutions that had been in place prior to that, right?
Absolutely. And then that's the thing is, when we talk about automation, everyone's thinking, robots running up and down aisles or, fusing parts together on an assembly line. But really, we're talking about automating data processes, robotic process automation, flipping the script to where, you no longer have, 80% of your time or 90% of your time spent on the data analysis or cleaning the data to only, have 10% on the decision making to now where we can flip that thanks to some of the automation that the system can do to where we spend 10% of the time on data, 90% on the decision making that comes out of that. And that's really just been a game changer.
Well, let me follow up on that. Let's talk specifically here about supply network versus supply chain. I'm just wondering, Paul, is it maybe slightly aggressive to try to optimize from a network standpoint before you even have your supply chain data in order?
Yeah, so there's, no, it's an interesting approach. And when we started attacking the problem, you've always run into, all right, we have to get our data right to be able to start optimizing, and you have to juggle that within potential system upgrades, which we're seeing a lot of now that can challenge those priorities and really inhibit. So that's been the traditional approach, is garbage in, garbage out. And as we look at, how can you start optimizing your network from a sourcing perspective, from a signaling perspective, and across an a growing complexity, if you don't know and you can't get your own house right. So where we start is being able to optimize within an organization. As we develop the technology, how can we speed that process up so we can get to outcomes and drive outcomes internally, and then start building network resiliency externally to the business.
Okay, so let's then talk about some of the leaps that industries are making in tech applications today. 5 strategies that everyone should consider when optimizing their supply chain. Let's look at number 1 here, and let me once again direct this to you, Paul. This first solution is how to implement enterprise-wide tech solutions in under 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay, seems obvious, but I think many supply chain experts may be shocked at an initiative taking just months instead of years, which is really what more they're used to. So maybe you could comment on that, Paul.
Yeah, and this is where we're going to. We talked about a few elements of this leading up to this first point, and what we're hearing a lot now and what we're seeing a lot now is, all right, everyone's going through a global upgrade of ERP systems or systems of record, potentially multiple systems right now. And that journey can be anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years, depending on the size of the organization. And business can't wait for that to start, for that to be completed, to start optimizing. So what you're seeing a lot of, and we're included in that, is purpose-built software as a service for specific areas of the supply chain that can plug in immediately and then start enhancing what you're doing today, but not become legacy too quickly as you implement new systems, right? So it can grow and scale with your organization today and into new systems there. But if you look at all the moving parts typically, and if we, because of where we play, I'll liken it to how we attack materials. Typically, you're going to buy a software product. You have to lead that with a data cleanse, categorization, organization, some sort of governance to be able to then have a system integrator take 6 months for data prep, 6 months for integration, and then roll out across multiple functions or multiple tools which aren't speaking to each other. So you're already playing from behind in that regard. So as we were developing technology, what if we could go in and use frontier technologies like natural language processing to be able to not cleanse to understand, but understand to execute, and be able to start unlocking opportunities across inventory and spend and risk, and how those influence one another when it comes to what do I need today? Because that's really the only thing that an organization wants. And if they could just magic wand or snap their finger, or the expectation of what they're implementing technology for is to just have presented to them the opportunities within the data, have that combined with the power and the knowledge of experts that can be augmented and focused towards making decisions that drive the business forward, and put yourself in a position where you can do that in months instead of years, and also make it more scalable because of the underlying technology.
Well, that is really upending conventional wisdom when you say that you don't have to start with an incredibly long and complex data cleansing project before anything else has to happen. So that's really an interesting way of accelerating your progress on a topic like this. You mentioned about natural language processing. I immediately think about artificial intelligence, which has been bandied about by a lot of companies and a lot of tech providers these days. Where does that come into this solution?
Yeah, so behind our solution, which is, again, we work on kind of three elements, right? We want to go to any global organization, regardless of what you do, regardless of what systems you run, and help solve for those systems, process, and people challenges. And so what we have in this experience that allows, which is new because everyone's getting into the same experience, to be able to work across those systems, work across those processes, whether you're operations or procurement or reliability, you're working together based on what your incentive is to be able to make the right decision, because they are dependent upon each other. And that's some of the friction that we've seen in, massive execution or scale. And so behind this simple, configurable, and sustainable, and the technology is really driving the sustainability, we're able to take multiple models that one that's built to be able to go in and read catalogs and movements and say, these 10 things are really one. And if we didn't know that, and now we know that, now we can search for them easier, we can keep data more harmonized, and we can drive, now we know that, demand and inventory and spend in different ways. And so that's one way we're using it. And we've, again, essentially descriptions, PO long text, elements that have traditionally been buried or have gaps in them. We're able to go read that information very quickly and be able to garner what is the data telling us. And these are the outcomes that we believe that understanding can drive. And so there's a whole other set of models that are able to take human feedback and knowledge and expertise on, here's why I agree, or here's why I don't agree, and here's why. So we start harnessing each decision and why are these decisions being made, so that we can, get people to put their names on things, start auditing against the past, and start being more predictive to the future, because every decision is going to lead to another one. And what does that decision unlock in terms of what we know within a facility for a material, or across what we're dropping across these organizations or virtual networks that you can run scenario models on before making decisions or investing a ton of resources in inventory or in people to do other things.
Okay, thanks. Josh, I want to bring you in from a product perspective. Can you elaborate more on the difference between implementing something like Verison versus an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, or an MDM, Master Data Management solution?
Well, yeah, sure. And, those systems aren't going anywhere, right? They have their place, they're needed. But to that point, they're systems of record, right? They're warehouses for this data. And there's that traditional, as Paul mentioned, this traditional mindset that we've got to clean the data before we can pull it. Well, with a purpose-built solution like Verison, right, you no longer need to clean the data. The information's already in the data. And to Paul's point, we've created the models that will then scrawl that data and pluck those insights out and present them to you and say, hey, I think this is what you're looking for, or hey, I think this is what you want to do with this data. And to his point, allows them to then say, yes, that's exactly what we were looking for. Let's put our fingerprint on that. Let's move forward with that, and let's make a decision based off of that. And, with these purpose-built solutions like Veracent and others out there that are designed to tackle these specific challenges, you don't need the lengthy implementation, right? It sounds too good to be true, but it's real. And so it's fewer resources from the IT perspective, right? There's no service. Services tacked on later after the fact, that ends up just boosting the cost of the implementation as well. So it's really it's been huge for organizations to have something that doesn't replace, it just plugs and pulls the data in and then gives you what you need.
Music to the ears of CIOs, CFOs, and even CEOs. We all know that they're much less patient about ROI these days. Yeah. So this is good news for them. You're recovering your investment, getting your job done a lot more quickly. Let's move on to the second big strategy here. That is the importance of building the correct tech stack. Paul, we know now that tech can be done quickly, but let's talk about the so-called full recipe. What should a supply chain tech stack really look like?
Yeah, so obviously you're going to have system of record, whether that's, SAP, Oracle, Infor, one of the, major ERP systems. They have, that's going to be your baseline. And there's, whether you're upgrading that or replacing it to another system, that's still going to be very core to your business. And then there's a lot of applications that have been either legacy, you're looking procure to pay, demand planning, CMMS, that work together with those systems of record, but are reliant on, good data, right? It goes back to, they can only work on what they're fed. And so there's this big data gap, and that's what we uncovered as we were looking at the landscape and, what can we do to fill that gap and, understand the data, which is what we started developing a handful of years ago. But then also where can we simplify experiences and start filling white space? Because we don't, from a company perspective, we have packaged this into, 5 to 7 solutions and, or replacement of projects that can be fed in and plugged in. So you can enhance that. So you don't have to worry about, am I making the wrong investment into a system that I'm going to be beholden to for potentially 10 or more years. You can experiment and enhance those systems and allow them to do what they were built to do, and then fill that white space with newer purpose-built technologies. And it's getting out of that, kind of overcoming the system challenges while you're doing the upgrade, building the plane while you're flying it, so to speak, but also being able to limit and really drive high value, low effort, and low risk solutions that drive some really powerful outcomes.
Josh, what about you? What are some tech stack tips that you've learned during your career, both overlapping the traditional supply chain as well as enterprise tech?
Well, yeah, I would say for starters, constantly evaluating what's out there, right? That's a big thing, right? Doing this early and often. I think SaaS and cloud has made that easier, right? You no longer have to commit to total cost of ownership anymore. With subscription services, you can try some of the low risk solutions, and tack them on. And I think to Paul's point, mentioning the large ERP vendors and some of the other larger players, they're starting to recognize some of their, I wouldn't necessarily say limitations, but they're expanding their partner network into solution providers like Veracent, right? And so they're seeing the value of, the purpose-built solution providers and saying, hey, we play well with them, extend your tech stack with them. So pay attention to what, your big vendors are saying and who they're partnering with. I think that's a big key to it. And as we mentioned earlier, every company is trying to move as quickly into, advanced digitization as quickly as possible, right? And so the more areas of your business you can apply that to, I think the better off you're going to be. Because, there's no magic system, I think, as Paul, piggybacking off of what Paul was saying, there's no magic system out there, right? It's going to take a, collection of solutions or platforms to optimize your end-to-end supply chain. No one provider can do it all. And so you're going to have to constantly just see what's out there and then pick the right one and plug it in. That way you can just optimize each piece to eventually have the whole thing exactly where you need it to be from a digital standpoint.
I think there's an important point there that I wanted to piggyback on, Josh, on why have we gotten to this point? To your earlier question, Bob, like supply chain technology was not necessarily architected or built for today's complex and ever-changing environment, from omni-channel to world challenges, all that type of stuff. And overall, it was good enough until it wasn't. And like the experience that we envision for our part of the supply chain, but that I think the ever-growing expectations of supply chain organizations and their individual users is that it needs to be a lot easier, a lot more simplified, meet the consumer expectations when driving such important decisions, and being able to scale. Like, up until this point, and we're still in this transition point, supply chain technology experiences were pretty painful or run too much outside of the system because of that pain, which limits the ability for any one system to be able to understand that. And that's why you're seeing, I think, a lot of intelligent technologies helping to fill those gaps.
Certainly going all the way back to the original ERP implementations. Boy, that was pain. And, which actually, it's gratifying to hear you guys say that you now don't have to throw your ERPs out with the bathwater. I'm sure that IT folks, after having gone through the pain of implementing that, are only too happy to hear you say that ERP still plays a role. Okay, so yeah, sure. A lot of companies are moving quickly toward digitization, but a lot of the stuff you guys are telling me about today, some of it feels really new. And I can imagine a company saying, well, maybe I'll wait a while, maybe I'll hold back and let somebody else prove out the kinks and all that. Josh, is there an advantage to being an early adopter?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is, we always hear the term about leaders and laggards, right? So that's the thing. Leaders are the ones who, they adopt a new technology when they see it. They do the research, they see the value, and they go ahead and pull the trigger on it. And it not only does it just allow them to, move ahead of the pack a little bit, but it's an ongoing foundational building is essentially what they're doing. So maybe they start with one purpose-built solution, but it also creates a model for them to expand and scale that maturity long-term. Right, and build off of that. And so I think that's one of the things that early adopters are really, really taking advantage of and seeing the benefit from a lot earlier than a lot of their competitors.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the third big strategy we're talking about today, how to evolve your mindset from project-based to sustainable. Now, Paul, I suspect this one's very near and dear to you. Project-based work, after all, is extremely prevalent, common in supply chains today. How do you move to a more sustainable approach?
Yeah, there are a couple zingers that come to mind, like once the pandemic hit, like, you're not going to project your way out of this one, right? Or, taking this approach of, all right, well, we can do this for a period of time. Again, we can't sustain this because of, in many cases, change management and people issues. You only get this kind of isolated and less scalable approach. And I think supply chain in general, supply chain technology and supply chains in general have been built on this. So you're kind of having to unravel it a little bit at this point. And data is no longer a project, it's a living, breathing thing, right? So how can you translate that across function to bring people together that, again, should be working together, but have typically been in separate projects, separate incentives, and then obviously with lack of visibility. So, big elements are, how can we look across and understand our organization as one, and projects won't give you that, right? You can only get an isolated look at that, and it needs to be consistent and almost, a system of routine. Even, it's not going to replace systems of record, but some of our users have called it a system of routine. I can go get what I need out of it, make a decision, and then get back to the other many things that we need to do. And I think that's the power of bringing people together, like, for instance, procurement and operations that have traditionally butted heads because of misaligned incentives. Now they can work together. People can put their names on things, and we can learn from those things. We can transfer knowledge. We had an example last week where an organization, hadn't started down the intelligence path and lost an individual that had been there for 25 plus years that knew everything about the assets that ran across this organization. And I think every organization probably has stories like that. And with labor challenges and shortages and transition of generations and what's out there from a knowledge perspective, I think that there still is a huge risk for organizations that go down the short-term project path versus something that will be more sustainable, so that they can hit not only that specific part of the organization's goals, but ancillary to that, what is the overall good of the organization? How can we truly run as one, even across business units?
Certainly the word project itself has this feeling, a sense of finality, like, well, we did it, we're done. Exactly. Walk away from it. And of course, we know that it's not that at all these days. So there's always a need to continue to improve. Josh, on this subject, I know you mentioned earlier the need for internal adoption, and it seems like this might be a good time for you to expand on that for us.
Yeah, for sure. Because to your point, right, a project seems very, very final, right? And so, but if you give your team a solution that actually you can see the results, and they get to put their fingerprint on it, right? And they get to see how their decision making within the solution is making a real impact, then you'll have greater adoption. And also it comes to the idea of realizing that we talked about optimization, as this grand thing that we're trying to achieve, but you never really achieve it, because the moment everything's optimized, as to Paul's point, because with data being a constant stream, a living thing, the moment you become optimized, you move away from it.
Yeah.
So you have to constantly just approach it as this thing that we're constantly striving towards, but the data is never really going to stop. So it's just, we're constantly making the incremental changes to improve year over year, or day over day, month over month, year over year, and turn it in, as we were discussing, into a sustainable concept for the organization.
Yeah,
without the internal adoption,
build off that foundation, and don't go backwards, right? And that's the big thing. What can we build off of? Continue to move forward. It's not an all in one fell swoop, but projects just lend for deterioration of results.
Okay, let's delve deeper into AI, artificial intelligence. Strategy number 4, why you should augment and not replace with AI. Paul, we've talked a little bit about AI so far in this hour, but you're not advocating for replacing jobs. How does AI augment, and wouldn't it just seems like it would do all the work?
Yeah, so I mean, it can augment and automate many tasks that frustrate, slow down progress, and limit human capacity. So AI is built there to augment human expertise, and without, what Josh touched on earlier, without the prerequisites that inhibit those outcomes, or the analysis that organizations are chasing in kind of a trying to find a needle in a haystack, so to speak, when you can systematically train models, especially purpose-built models, to overcome and be able to present you so you can make decisions, right? Now, ultimately there's, I think, strategy shift, right? Augment humans. And yes, you may replace, certain functions of people, but replace them into more valuable, reallocate those resources into more valuable future state positions for the business. So as you're looking, it's all about training and being able to not be limited by that piece of data you don't know, but having the ability for an AI to reach back and find that one piece of data that would have ultimately been buried, but can be kind of the key that unlocks a certain singular decision or a multitude of decisions across an organization.
But even so, we still don't take people out of the loop. I mean, there's still a person at the other end.
Yeah.
The AI generates some kind of decision, and it's probably a good one, but you still want a person there, at least now, to verify and to execute on it.
So, yeah, and that's a big part of what we do is here's what the data is telling us. Have humans verify that across function. How does that translate and execute? Then refresh the data. What changed? And keep rinsing and repeating some of these foundational activities that happen, back to projects at a moment in time, and then don't get updated, or it gets stale too quickly and it can't keep up with the speed and pace of the world and global organizations.
Sure. Josh, let me ask you to bring into this topic of AI, the whole idea of this new generation of workers, and who they are and what their attitude toward technology is and what kind of user experience they're expecting. Just talk a little bit about how that fits in.
Well, absolutely. So first of all, AI is not new. All right. So this has been around, right? And it's just gotten better over the past several decades. But I mean, we've heard about, IBM's Watson for how long? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, but no one ever really put the oh, that's AI, so, but no, but we've so used to it. And so now with this user generation that's been exposed to AI through, just tons of technology that they use on an everyday basis, whether it just be something like Siri or Alexa, which is a form of AI, right? The ability to have a system that can bring you information quickly. And you have an entire generation of people that are used to having quick access to information at their fingerprints, right? Thanks to AI. That is going to be something that's key to driving the success with these people, with this wave of workers that are coming into the workforce. Not only that, you have a system that has the ability to, gather the knowledge and work it into the model, as Paul was saying, is because, we have, expertise that's leaving, they're retiring, they are going on to, pursue other activities. And we need a system that captures this information so that as younger workers come in, they have the expertise that they need without being too reliant on going around and asking other people about it, right? It's already been worked into the system, right? So that guidance is coming, that almost mentorship is coming from the older generation being worked into the system. And now the new generation of worker can use that knowledge in order to continue driving success.
Of course, the cool thing is they're already predisposed toward working with this type of technology. You don't have to convince them that it's of value. So very interesting. Okay, so here's something we talked about earlier, and this will form the basis of our fifth and final big strategy tip: how to bridge the gap between procurement and operations initiatives. This one is something of a doozy. How do these two groups that typically work against each other, as we said earlier, find a common goal? Paul?
Yeah, so this was, as we were looking across personas, right? Like why haven't the strategies of the past, even before the pandemic, heightened to the chaos there? Like, what has been the challenge? And it's been, yes, there have been system challenges and data challenges, and then processes that aren't fed appropriately, but are really too siloed and isolated but it really comes down to a lot of human elements and people initiatives, starting with incentives, right? So if you think about the incentive of procurement, traditionally has been to drive out cost and, align to strategic vendors, initiatives, services, things of that nature, and trying to, categorize contracts and all the sourcing and events that drive within supply chain, at least, procurement initiatives. And sometimes that, even while on paper, those efforts and initiatives look great, it was not aligned to what operationally maybe the organization needs. And one we see all the time is, I don't care about driving capital out or buying from this vendor because it's going to open me up for a risk. And all I care about is keeping the facilities up and running and meeting production schedules. So driving out costs, while it looks good and it, pleases the organization, may cost us more. And there's been not enough data, and not enough environments across systems to be able to allow those, incentives to come together and say, hey, I think we can achieve both. And, we can drive out costs without it opening up for me, because we can put our names on it. We can work together. We can have some opinion in a model. And that's where, again, deep learning and some really cool technologies help unlock this, to say that we can make these decisions, feel comfortable with them, tell more about our why, and then align for the greater good of the overall organization, because those elements, procurement and operations, need to be functioning. And what I need as an operations person, sourcing and procurement is charged to go find for me. And that can happen when folks are telling their why, putting their names on, this is what I need to influence spend. And that's really the approach we took, was if we can understand the data, drive an outcome of what do I need across material, across facility, across virtual networks, then how does that influence spend? So we're starting to unlock some of those insights that say, all right, where should I be buying from to meet this demand for this individual material, but also across this internal virtual network that'll ultimately build towards unlocking more network resiliency internally and externally.
And then thereby getting everybody on board on all sides too, supposedly feuding or disciplines. Yeah, I always find it fascinating to hear this point driven home again and again, that a technology implementation is never just about technology. It's about a whole mindset change. It's about the people involved and how they think about each other and the outside and inside the organization. And you did a great job there, Paul, just describing a little bit about how that might come about as a result. Okay. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for running down those 5 big strategies. Very valuable tips, I think, that every company should be looking at these days. But I think let's move now to the audience question and answer portion of our presentation. And audience members, we do have some questions that have already come in, but even as we are answering them, we are inviting you to continue to submit your questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can, time permitting. So here's a few questions. I'm going to just throw these out and see which one of you gentlemen, or maybe both, you would like to address it. This first one asks, what do you mean when you say, quote, the data doesn't need to be clean to move forward with optimization? We did talk about that a lot. How can bad data be optimized?
Yeah, I can start, and then Josh, you can add on to it if you'd like. Again, there's typically enough data in a system, albeit dirty and incomplete, that you can garner a good high percentage of what's happening there and what you can do with it, because data is only as good as what you can do with it. And no organization is going to say, I want to put all these resources so we can have the best data in the world if we can't do anything with it. So as we look at, all right, I call it this, they call it that, but it's really the same thing, so I can garner an outcome out of that. That's really what we mean. Better data is better, but it's been proven over the last couple of decades that it's, you're chasing perfection. And if we can get started with good enough is good enough to garner outcomes that are valuable, we could always augment data and harmonize it and continue to have kind of an engine that's always looking at synergies and across data and those outcomes and across systems.
Josh, you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I was just saying, we mentioned it earlier, but I think one of the aspects is when you try and hinder your data, which with these prerequisites, that don't necessarily talk back to the system the way that they should, that's when you're going to run into a lot of the problems. And so when you have a system that can kind of go around the prerequisites or just remove the need for them and pull the information from the data that you already have and the data that will continue to come in, because to Paul's point, there's no shortage of data, right? And it's coming in from all different angles. So if you have something that, that can, and we mentioned this earlier, just kind of run through it and pick out the insights that are already there and can do it quickly, then you have, a whole different system that you can work with that you previously didn't have access to.
Yeah, great. Okay, this question says, what do you feel tends to be the lowest hanging fruit for large distribution networks undergoing optimization efforts?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding, distribution network in terms of, I distribute goods and, and services, I need to know what's going on across that distribution network, right? So what are the demands of where I'm distributing elements, right? We work with a lot of industrial distributors and are helping to connect the dots of where can they align more strategically with their best customers. How do they know so that you're planning off of real or near real-time data versus planning off of historicals, so it has a kind of a snowball effect. If you're planning off historicals, something changes within your customer, you don't know that, or it's communicated in a manual or a traditional way via spreadsheet or email or telephone, you don't know how to make the adjustments on your network to fulfill those demands and needs, nor do your potential suppliers go there. So as we look at what's the lowest hanging fruit, it's being able to understand and harness more of those customer demand signals so that you can apply that to sell more, but also become more operationally efficient and feed existing WMS models or whatever it may be on where you need to put things to support that demand without over-insuring yourself or opening yourself up to risk.
Thank you. Here's a question, a great question coming up here, although it threatens to open up a whole new can of worms and maybe an entire new webinar, but let's see if I can get you guys to address it. How do we gain visibility into our supply chain network and use emerging technologies to understand sub-tier suppliers?
All right. Well, I think there's always been this, we've heard a lot of initiative towards eliminating tail spend. This is one of the top things organizations are always trying to do is streamline more information. So, some of the things that we've been doing to help organizations uncover where they have tail spend or how to feed more of their demand to strategic suppliers that ultimately drive out costs and reduce risk is tracking and trending these elements across different materials that may be one, and what does that look like? And if we treat them as one, and we're not chasing things or having to go through scorecard activities and meetings with suppliers, but we just present them with what's actually happening, and we're not needing suppliers to provide us what's happening as a user of services or products, which I think has been ultimately, it's been too much data to control. Systems couldn't control, where people were buying, or you just let them, do it because it was too hard to manage. And all these things kind of come to a head at some point. So it's proactively scorecarding without having to go to your supplier and look at that. And some of these new systems, including ours, are going to allow you to do that more effectively.
Maybe I'll ask Josh to kick off the answer to this one as a product guy. This questioner says, my company has adopted a few solutions that seem to be underutilized because they're too complex. Mm-hmm. What does the average day look like for your business user?
That's a great question. So, I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? Because, it depends on, some of our customers are going in every day and they're looking at the recommendations that, that our models are throwing up there, and they're looking specifically for cost reduction opportunities, right? So they're going in and they're seeing where duplicates might exist or where a shortage might exist. So they're seeing like, okay, so here we have these duplicates. I don't need those. So I'm going to accept this recommendation. We're going to pass on replenishment on that particular order. Or if I see a shortage, like, oh, okay, I see the shortage exists. I can look at the system and says, well, I need these things pretty much every 6 months. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I boost my safety stock so I don't run the risk of an outage. So that's one aspect of it. Then we have other people that are coming in and they're saying, okay, so you mentioned here that you had overages, but one of your sister facilities, in a different region has shortages there. So there's an opportunity for you to share some of the materials. Then you have other people that are going in and using one I think is probably one of our least talked about features, not to get too heavy in the features, but the ability just to do a quick fuzzy search of materials, and we can show you where it's at, what bin location. That way, if you have a shortage or if you need something similar, but it's not exactly listed the same way, we have people that are using that on a daily basis to make sure that they have the right parts that they can just plug in and they never miss an SLA.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any business user today who comes home at the end of a day of work and says, I had an average day. I wouldn't doubt that's probably the case. Okay, maybe I'll ask Paul to tackle this one. And the question is, how can I convince leadership to create the budget for new technology like this when we are focused on reducing costs throughout the organization? We talked about the attractiveness, the sped up ROI, that's fine, but that's after the project, that's after the initiative is underway. This is asking, like, how do you create a budget in the first place and get it through?
Yeah, so the way we help organizations start looking at this challenge outside of regular budget cycles, right, is by assessing what's happening today, right? And when you look at materials, we can take raw tables directly from ERP or EAM and start garnering insights of what's there economically, hard dollar value. Yes, there's going to be process improvements, but there's a lot of over-insurance, so to speak, that's out there that should immediately be able to be optimized and refined, that can take your capital number further and further down and ROIs up without introducing new risks. So we try to start there simply as, it's not about reduction, it's not just about cost savings, but that's a simple byproduct of how we look at systems, processes, and people. You can find capital and hard dollar and adjacent executable ROI very quickly, very easily, and build your business case so it's less of a risk, less of a gamble for you, and you can communicate that effectively to your leadership team of, hey, this is a better process or approach to these challenges. We can invest in this one solution that has multiple functions in the same place working together versus, all right, this budget's here, this budget's there, and you're collectively spending 5 times more. It's just hitting a different P&L line. Are some of the ways that we look at, trying to help organizations through that budgetary challenge and building business cases that they're going to sell and make the organization more effective.
Unfortunately, folks, we are just about out of time. We have time for just one more question, and I'm going to direct it to Paul. Why is supply network optimization so much more valuable than data optimization.
Yeah, we've said it a couple times and touched on it a couple times throughout the discussion here today, but when you really are looking at the next 3, 5, 10 years, of evolution or this supply chain technology renaissance that we're amidst right now, no organization is going to be rewarded by Wall Street or by growth if they have the best data. It's what you do with it. And so you need to take a look at the approaches of what can you do now that can build into the future. And it's really about, if I can understand within my 4 walls, how my organization is running across business unit, across system, across personas, so that I truly get this desired one XYZ company initiative that executives and then folks down to the plant floor can execute upon, then I can establish internal network resiliency and then start working with my suppliers by trading demand signals and information and acknowledgments external to that. That's how network resiliency is, going to be realized. And when we talk about supply network optimization, it can't come along with lengthy and cumbersome integrations across systems. It needs to be cloud driven. It needs to be intelligently driven. And that's how we're going to extend and achieve network resiliency, in my opinion, well before some of the timelines of 2030 and beyond, and achieve some of the promises that were there with MEBNs and other elements or solutions that traditionally wanted to tackle this problem but haven't necessarily nailed it.
Fantastic. Just get your priorities right. It's very interesting to hear this perspective. We don't always hear, but thank you very much for that. We are indeed out of time, but before we go, I just do want to, first of all, thank Paul Noble and Josh Ferguson for a fantastic presentation full of information in a very short time. Thank you very much for that. Also, I do want our audience members to know about a couple of white papers that they can access from Verison. One is on how manufacturers can weather economic uncertainty. The other is 5 quick tips for optimizing mergers and acquisitions. Now, you will receive a link to both of these white papers in a follow-up email. There also, you're looking at where you can contact Verison, its URL, its website, and its email. So be sure and check them out to find out more information about what we've been talking about today. Once again, Paul and Josh, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, audience members, for your attendance and participation and for your great questions. So everybody, have a great day.